Hi everyone, it's Laura here and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video I'm going to show you some advanced mirror stamping techniques to create some fun scenes on your cards. For my first card today, I wanted to create a scene in which this fun crocodile is looking at its own reflection in the mirror. This stamp is from the Heffy Doodle Stamps Happy Snappy Crocs stamp set, and I am starting off my card by stamping the image directly on some Nina Solar White 110 pounds cardstock. I am using my favorite things Black Licorice Hybrid ink to do my stamping, and now I am going to go ahead and start getting things ready for my mirror stamping. If you are new to this technique, you can watch a video that I shared here on my channel where I explain in detail what it consists of. But basically you use a stamp like the one that I have on my Misty, not on the door but actually on the body of my Misty, to pick up the ink from your stamp, and then you use that base to transfer the ink onto your paper, and that way you get a mirrored impression of your image. As I said at the beginning of the video, I wanted to create a scene in which the crocodile is looking at its reflection in the mirror, and I thought it would be cool if I could create some light glares on the mirror itself. So what I did is I created two masks out of some Heffy Doodle memo tape, and I masked off two portions of the crocodile. I can now go ahead and ink up my stamp. I will remove the masks like you do for any masked stamping technique, and then I will transfer the image from my stamp onto that block of photopolymer. This is a stamp by My Favorite Things and it's called the Mirror Image Stamp. And if you don't have this stamp, don't worry, because you can basically use any large photopolymer stamp to reproduce the same steps. So once the ink is transferred to my mirror image stamp, I can go ahead and take my Nina Solar White cardstock and place it face down onto my stamp. I am closing the lid of my Misty so that I get a nice pressure in the same areas where I have my stamped lines. And then I can go ahead and peel off the paper to reveal the stamped image. I went over the stamped lines with a Copic multiliners so that they would get nice and dark, making sure not to touch those areas that I had masked while stamping, and then I moved on to coloring my images. For that I am using my Spectrum Noir markers, and I forgot to mention before, but basically the fact that I wanted to use Spectrum Noir markers was the reason why I used My Favorite Things Hybrid ink. When you do mirrored stamping, you need an ink that is juicy and that doesn't dry too much. And because I wanted to use my alcohol markers, I picked My Favorite Things Hybrid ink over my VersaFine Onyx Black ink, because VersaFine Onyx Black ink would have bled with my alcohol markers. I don't really want to go into the details of the coloring for this card. I did some pretty basic blending using 3 markers. The only thing I wanted you to notice is that the shading on these images is also mirrored. So for the crocodile that will be looking at himself, I am adding the shadows on the bottom and on the left areas of his body, whereas for his reflected image, I am adding shadows to the right and to the bottom part of his body. And also I will make sure not to color over those areas that I had masked during my stamping, because that's where I have my light glares. To create the background for my scene and my mirror, I used 2 dies from the Heffy Doodle Clover Frames dies, and I cut some Bristol Smooth cardstock. I used this smaller die to cut some Nina Solar White cardstock too, and I will use that to create the glass of my mirror. I am extending the light glares from the crocodile into the mirror, and then I will fill in the rest of the area with my Spectrum Noir markers. For my background, I did some quick ink blending. I used distress inks in antique linen and gathered twigs for the floor and in abandoned coral for the wall. I am using my Heffy Doodle memo tape to create a quick mask, and once I'm done with the ink blending, I will spritz the entire surface with some water to add some interest. I also used the same distress inks in antique linen and gathered twigs to create the floor that I glued down on the glass of my mirror, and then I could go ahead and assemble my scene. Before gluing everything down, I had drawn in some drop shadows for my crocodiles using my Spectrum Noir markers, and the final element for my scene is the frame of the mirror that I obtained from some Bristol Smooth cardstock, where I ink blended distress inks in seedless preserves and warm lipstick. I picked the sentiment that reads Smile from the Happy Snappy Crocs stamp set by Heffy Doodle, and I also stamped the little exclamation mark, and for that I used again my favorite things ink in black licorice. I mounted everything on a top folding A2 card base, and that finished off my first card. For my second card today, I will be showing a more advanced masking technique in combination with the mirror stamping technique. And the first thing I needed to do was to create masks, both for my direct image, so to say, and for my mirrored image. So here I'm using again the mirror image stamp by My Favorite Things and another image from the Heffy Doodle Very Big Heart stamp set to create a mask for the mirrored image out of some Heffy Doodle memo tape. This is a low-tack tape that is really useful when you want to do some masking. And now I am creating also a second mask by stamping directly my image onto my masking paper. I fussy cut my masks with my scissors, separating the bears from the hearts. And then I can start stamping on my Nina Solar White cardstock. The scene I wanted to create was one in which there was another bear opposite to this one, hugging the heart. So what I need to do is I have to do some masking on the side of the heart where there is still no bear, because I need to leave some space to stamp another one later. So you saw what I did. I used my Misty to transfer the ink to my mirror image stamp that I have there in the body of my Misty. I masked off the area where I want my other bear to be. And now I will use my paper to pick up the ink that I have on my mirror stamp. And you can see that once I peeled the paper off the block, there are no stamped lines where I had my mask. At this point, all that's left to do is to stamp the bear in that space that we created for it. And because here I am not using any mirrored stamping technique, but just direct stamping, so to say, this is just an easy matter of doing some masked stamping. So as you can see, I used the masks that I had created for my mirrored image to protect the areas that I had already stamped. I am carefully positioning the stamp and I am protecting my paper using some acetate. And once I am confident with the position of the stamp, I am going to selectively ink it. And then I can close the lid of my Misty and stamp it in place. It turns out that I did a good thing with not stamping the heart again, because the positioning of my bear was good enough that you can't really tell from the final image, but had I stamped the whole heart, I would have ended up with double stamping on my heart and I would have had to start over. I used my Copic multiliner again to darken up the stamped lines on my mirrored image, and then I colored everything with my Spectrum Noir markers. I'm not going to show the coloring for this card because I want this video to be focused on the mirror stamping technique. So we can directly skip ahead and have a look at how I created my card base. I cut a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock by Strathmore using the Heffy Doodle Clover Frames dies. And I apologize that the camera is a little bit off focus here, but basically what I did is I used the ink smooshing technique. I pressed my Distress Oxides onto my glass mat, and I am using peacock feathers and tumbled glass. I then spritzed them with water so that the inks would move a little bit more easily. And now I am using a Ziploc bag to pick up the ink and transfer it to my panel. I repeated these steps several times, adding multiple layers and drying between layers, and then I moved on to my card base. For that, I die cut some pink cardstock to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches using the stitched rectangle die in the Heffy Doodle Clover Frames die set. I am now creating my own pattern paper by stamping repeatedly some of the smaller images from the Heffy Doodle Very Big Heart stamp set. And you can see that I am changing the orientation of my acrylic block so that I get a pattern that looks as random as possible. I heat embossed my sentiment with white embossing powder on black cardstock, and I picked the one from the Very Big Heart stamp set that reads "I love you very much." I am using the Heffy Doodle Strips of Ease to die cut a strip around the sentiment, and then I went ahead and put my card together. I glued everything flat to a top-folding A2 card base that I created out of some white cardstock, and now I am adding some accents using my Nuvo drops in White Blizzard. This one will dry clear but has some glitter to it, and I used some confetti as placeholders to figure out exactly where to place my Nuvo drops. Off camera, I added a little flower next to the ears of one of the two bears, and that finished off my second card. And that's it for today. If you guys enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments below, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. You can visit my blog for the full list of supplies, and I'll catch you guys soon with the next one. Ciao!